Hi guys, how's it going? My name's Helena and I'm a Young People's Programming team member over at the Wigton Festival Company. This event is brought to you by Book Week Scotland, which is kindly supported by the Scottish Book Trust. I'm delighted to be introducing you today to the wonderful Elle McNicoll with her new book, A Kind of Spark. A Kind of Spark follows the adventures of 11-year-old Addie, who's campaigning to get a memorial built in her hometown to commemorate the witch trials that have happened in previous years. I really hope you guys enjoyed the book as much as I did, but you're not here to hear me speak, you're here to hear Elle speak. So I'm delighted to pass you over to Elle McNicoll.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Book Week Scotland event supported by Scottish Book Trust, produced by Wigtown Festival Company. My name is Gavin Hetherington. I am hosting this event with the incredible Elle McNicoll, and I will pass you over to Elle, who will introduce herself and tell you all about who she is.
Hi everybody, thank you Gav. So my name is Elle McNicoll. I am a Scottish author and I'm the author of A Kind of Spark, which is my debut novel published by Nights Of. Maybe some of you know it, maybe some of you don't. I'm also a neurodivergent author, which means that I have a different neurological makeup. I'm autistic and I'm also dyspraxic. And that's very much a part of my experience as an author and very much what I put in this book, as well as being Scottish, which I'm also very proud of. So yeah, it's really exciting to be here to talk about Kind of Spark with Book Week in Scotland and Scottish Book Trust and Wigtown, because I'm proudly Scottish. So yeah, thank you for having me and thank you for doing this with us, Gav.
No problem. And so, as you mentioned there, that you are an author, but I'm kind of wondering, is that something you always wanted to do? Have you always wanted to write these kind of stories for children?
Yeah, so probably like a lot of young people watching this now, I've been writing stories since I was very young. And when I started, I didn't know what I was doing really. I didn't know how to construct stories. I just knew that I loved to read and I really wanted to move on to the next step, which is writing. Um, I'm not a very good illustrator. I really wish I could illustrate my own stories, but I'm not any good at drawing, but I did have loved writing for a very long time. Kind of Spark is the first time I sat down and actually tried to write a kid's book. But I had probably about 1,000 uncompleted books from when I was 6 and older, books that will never ever be published or see the light of day. But it's very important that you get those books out your system so that you can one day write something that is hopefully quite good.
Well, it produced A Kind of Spark, which for me is a phenomenal read, and I've seen a lot of people reading it recently, especially with it having gotten such critical acclaim with Book of the Month from Waterstones, and just seeing all of the people read it. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal book. So can you let people know what A Kind of Spark is about? And just so in case anybody hasn't read it yet, they'll know what the story is and everything behind that.
Absolutely. So A Kind of Spark is a middle grade book, and it's about an 11-year-old girl called Addie who lives in a small village in Scotland, not dissimilar to the one I grew up in when I lived in Scotland. And in that village, Addie learns that hundreds of years ago, they executed people for the crimes of witchcraft. And she's horrified by this, and she's also a little bit fascinated by it. And she thinks, how could a town that hasn't changed a lot in hundreds of years, how could they have done this to people purely because they were different, not because they did anything wrong, but because they were different? And because she's autistic, she identifies a lot with these witches, and so she begins a campaign to fight for a memorial to be made in the town. But unfortunately, a lot of the assembly members in the town elders, as it were, are not very enthused about the idea, and they try to stop her from making her memorial. So it's all about how she fights to keep getting back up and getting that memorial made. And you'll have to read to the very end to find out if she does it. But it's about this small Scottish kid with a lot of heart fighting for what she believes in. That's as much as I can say without giving away too much, I think.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to write? Because you've probably put a lot of yourself in this book as well, so it must have been quite a hard process to write this book from start to finish. So how did you sit yourself down to start writing this book, and how did it form over time? How long did it take you?
It took actually the draft that went to the publishers took 2 days to write. That's very quick. But the idea had been building and building for years. You know, I was thinking a lot about the witch trials because, like I said, I grew up in a village in Scotland, in an area near Edinburgh where there were a lot of witch trials. You know, these were real historic things that did happen. Maybe some people watching this also live in towns or parts of Scotland that had witch trials, but you know, it was very real. And I just always remembered learning about it, and it never really left me. I just continued to carry that memory of those stories with me. And I was researching it just for my own interest, and I was, you know, reading up about it. And I just thought, this is, you know, an incredibly important part of history that we don't pay enough attention to. And I don't think that it has been memorialized properly. There's a couple of memorials popping up now, actually, which is really interesting, but there isn't a sort of big proper one. So that was one issue I was thinking about a lot. And then I was also thinking about the fact that when I was, you know, I'm a big middle grade reader myself. I love to read kids' books. I think we're living in an age of middle grade that is very golden and fantastic. And I love the books that are out at the moment. But I was reading them and thinking, wow, there really isn't any, you know, there aren't protagonists, meaning main characters in the story, that are like me. And I remembered being very, you know, a young reader, you know, before I was diagnosed, and then after I was diagnosed, I remembered just never finding you know, and that a character that was like me, and that felt normal. You know, to me, I just accepted that was maybe how it was always going to be. So, but as an adult, I thought, you know, why should we accept that? Really, you know, there's a lot of us, so you know, there should be more books about us. And so the two things kind of came together, and the book sort of poured out in about 2 days, and then it got sent to the publishers about, you know, a little bit later, and then there were lots of, you know, redrafts and edits, but it was quite quick. It was an idea that sat with me for a few years, and if you are any young writers watching this, I would say, you know, don't start writing an idea immediately. Let it sort of sit in your brain for a little bit, and if it doesn't ever go away, then that tells you have to write about it.
It's funny you mentioned that you didn't, I mean, have many stories as a child reading where you could see yourself in that book. So, I mean, because it's his own voices, it's not like you had to do research into how to depict a main character who is neurodivergent or anything like that. It comes from you. So was that a daunting thing? Because obviously a lot of children haven't. I mean, even now, there's still very, very few own voices and neurodivergent characters and authors. Was that daunting for you to kind of have no framework and to kind of plunge yourself into children's fiction where there isn't really much that you can go off of?
It was very daunting. You're absolutely right. There isn't a lot, and what there is usually boys, which is a little bit different. And it's usually written by people that aren't neurodivergent, so they get a lot of things wrong. And I really wanted to just write an honest, you know, the way I feel things. And it was daunting because, you know, while you're writing these things, a lot of which are very personal, you know, Addie's very different to me in a lot of ways, but a lot of her sensory issues, a lot of her processing issues are things that I experience. And that was very frightening to put on the page, because every, you know, one thing about not reading about characters like you is that you also don't write characters like you. You just assume that you have to write characters that are neurotypical, meaning non-autistic. And so it was my first time actually writing a character that was like me, and it felt very daunting and very scary. It was like, you know, stepping out of the woods into like the open, and it was very frightening. And I also was thinking, what if I am the only one who feels like this? What if it's just me? But the great thing is that since it's been published, I get, you know, every day I get a message or an email or a letter. I got a lovely stack of letters yesterday from people saying, this is me, like, this is how I live every day. I thought I was alone. I thought I was, you know, the only one who felt this. And that's incredible. But at the time it was so daunting. It just felt very raw, I think is the word I would use. Very scary.
Yeah, which I guess when you're writing it and you're doing it kind of for yourself, now it's out in the world, it's kind of beyond you now. And
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And as you said, it was daunting to write. It must have been even more daunting to try and get it published, because with you saying there hasn't really been much before, especially own voices. So did you have those doubts in your mind that you wouldn't actually get published because you're writing something that was so different?
I definitely, yeah, I think so. And also I should say, when I took it to the publishers, I wasn't actually going to meet with the publishers to talk about publishing a book. I never thought anybody would want to publish it, because people in the industry had told me, they'd said, you know, these books won't sell, there's no market for them, nobody wants to read this. These, you know, one person said, a lot of people have heard this now, but one person said, these people don't read books, let alone write them. They didn't know that I was neurodivergent when they said that. I hope they wouldn't have said it if they'd known. But that really stayed in my head. I thought, oh gosh, you know, what if they're right? So I went to my publishers looking for a job in editorial, which means the people who edit the books and who take bits out of the books and put things in. They don't write the books, but they help sort of make the books ready for publication. That was the job I was seeing, if there was any, you know, space for me to do that. And I was also there saying, you know, if you need a proofreader or you need somebody, like, I want to do that. And David, who's one of the publishers of my publishing house, Nights Of, he said, well, you know, we don't have any in-house positions because we do a lot of outside hiring, but if you have a book, we'd love to read your book. And I don't know, you know, to this day, it really is kind of fate that I just went, okay, because, you know, if I'd thought about it for too long, I would have said, no, the book's not ready to be read by anyone. It's not something I think anybody would be interested in. But I was just so, I think, frustrated and so tired of the industry not caring about this that I just thought, fine, they can read it, and when they say no, then I'll give up and that'll be it. But they didn't say no, they said yes, and they published it. And, you know, despite COVID, you know, it came out in June when bookshops were shut, and obviously in England shops are shut now, but I think it's done quite well considering, you know, the year that we're in. And I definitely think a lot of those people were wrong who said that there was no market for it and that nobody would care, because I think that's far from the truth. So
100%, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And we've seen it through the success of A Kind of Spark and what it's kind of done for Nights Of as well. There's just been so much conversation about kind of how well that the book's done and all of that. So speaking of Nights Of, they are a fantastic publisher, and I would love for you to talk about your experience with them and like how they physically made A Kind of Spark a reality, because it was a dream for you. It's a dream for a lot of neurodivergent children, and it's definitely, like, I think, a huge step in the right direction for publishing. So Nights Of took that first step with you. How was that?
They did, and they are very different to almost all other publishers, I'd say. Maybe some of you have read High Rise Mystery by Sharna Jackson, or Ghost by Jason Reynolds, but Nights Of published those. Nights Of only publish books that are inclusive, meaning that they're books for everyone, about everyone, and they tend to look for authors who are underrepresented, so Black authors, disabled authors, you know, neurodivergent authors. And so they're looking for writers and books that are not the 99% in the market. And that's why I really liked them and wanted to work with them. I never thought that they would publish me, but that's what's so exciting about them. And when they took the book on, they said, we're going to get a neurodivergent illustrator to do the cover. So Kay Wilson, who does the cover, has got ADHD, and they got another editor in who is autistic, and she gave it a second look just to, you know, give her opinions on, you know, we had a team that was neurodivergent. So that was every bit as emotional as having the book published, because, you know, as well as being told there was no market for these books, I was also being told by a lot of publishers, you know, these people don't work in publishing, and suddenly there's a team around me, and I just think, well, here we are, you know, we exist, and we're all going to make this book, you know, as good as it can be. So they're a really special publisher, and I think they're going to do even more exciting things next year, and they're really responsible for driving a lot of the most exciting books at the moment, and creating some really good change. So I think it was a real like a real twist of fate that these two kind of things came together, because I don't think another publisher could have done for Spark what Nights of have done.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic.
As this is for Scottish Book Trust and for Scottish Book Week, you know, everyone talks about A Kind of Spark now as, you know, this neurodivergent book, which of course it is, and I'm so proud of that, but it's also a Scottish book. It's about Scotland. It's about a Scottish girl and a Scottish family in a Scottish community. There's lots of specific humour in the book that is very about Scotland, and it's, you know, inspired by me growing up there. And so I wish people would talk about that a little bit more, because I think people forget that, not, you know, a lot of books are not set in Scotland. They're often set in America, or they're set in London. And it was really important to me that Juniper, which is the fictional village in the book, was a Scottish community, because I think Scotland sometimes in fiction can tend to be a little bit too Braveheart and a little bit too sort of overly romanticized, and I wanted to kind of write a real Scottish, modern Scottish story. So that's why it's so exciting to be doing this for Scottish Book Week, because, you know, that's been the great part, is getting letters from kids from Scotland going, where's the tree that's in the book? I want to go and see it. Or getting messages from people back in my village at home going, you know, there's people walking around trying to find certain things. Like, you should tell these readers that this is not a real, you know, this isn't the real village. I'm just, that's crazy to me, that there's people trying to find things from the book and back in Scotland. So yeah, if you are a Scottish reader, there's so much of you know, Scotland in it, and it's every bit a Scottish book as well as a neurodivergent book. So yeah, that was really important to me when I was writing it, was to have that community reflected in it.
Was that because Juniper is fictional, right? It's not like
Juniper is fictional. The village it's based on is called, okay, I'll out myself, it's called Juniper Green, which is it's a little village outside Edinburgh, but Juniper is a fictional version. I just love that word. I loved the word Juniper. I think it's a great word. It's more of a sort of Linlithgow type village, and some people will know what that means. It's more that like kind of a community in the book. It is fiction, before people start terrorizing my neighbors back home. It's not a real village, but I think if you've grown up in any of the small villages outside Edinburgh, you know, if you're from Lithgow, if you're from Aberlady, if you're from North Berwick, you know, all these places, you'll probably recognize a lot of Juniper and think, oh, I know someone like that, or, you know, it's got that kind of small town humor.
I do love like small town. I do love small town places, and I definitely think you see it in this book. You see not just the main characters, but all of the different characters in it as well, the background characters. They're very present, and I feel like that's very important for a community, because it feels like Addie's world is just that little bit bigger. Even though it's a small town, it feels big just through with like the reflection of community, and especially a Scottish community and all of that. So yeah, it must be, I bet you wanted to do Scotland proud.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted it to be, you know, a fair portrayal and an honest one, but also one that people would be proud of, because I think Scotland's really good about being progressive and being, you know, forward thinking and egalitarian and looking after our neighbours and our friends. And so I think Addie thinks that too, and that's why she says, look, there's this horrible thing that happened hundreds of years ago, yes, but still it happened. We should, you know, do something about it. And like I said, I can't spoil what happens at the end, but that's her fight and her cause. And the comedy sometimes comes from the town elders being very preoccupied with wanting Juniper to be a tourist attraction and wanting it to be lovely and sweet, and they don't really want this scary grisly legacy brought up on them. And that's where the comedy and the push and the pull comes from. And if you've ever, like me, been in a town meeting, then you'll know exactly what they're like. And there's a lot of town meetings in the book, which are a lot of fun. So yeah, if you've grown up in a big city, you maybe don't know, but I think you'll still enjoy them. They're a very special brand of comedy.
So thank you everybody for watching this section of the event, speaking with Elle McNicoll about the book Origins of A Kind of Spark. So thank you again to Book Week Scotland, and supported by the Scottish Book Trust and produced by Wigtown Festival Company. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.